Thanks so much. Well, first off, I want to acknowledge that today is National Indigenous Peoples Day, National Indigenous Peoples Day. A very important day for us to celebrate Indigenous culture, language, tradition, teachings, and a day for us to commit to justice for the first people of this land. I also want to talk about the end of session, and something that is deeply concerning to me is that we are just a week away from the Liberal government cutting the help that people need by $800 a month. Those Canadians that are on CRB, who cannot go back to work, whose jobs are just not there, whose sectors are still shut down because of COVID-19, can't go to work, and they are relying on the CRB. The Liberals cutting it by $800 will be devastating to these families. We have spoken with them. It means they will not be able to put food on the table. They will not be able to pay their rent. So we are again imploring the Liberal government, do not cut the help that people need while we are still in this pandemic. We are not through this pandemic yet. So while we are still getting through this, continue that help that people need. Do not cut their help by $800. Justin Trudeau said many times he will have people's back. Well, this is not having their back. Cutting the help they need by $800 a month is not having their back. So again, stop the cuts to CRB. But beyond that, what we're seeing with this Liberal government is they're tabling a number of bills right now. They tabled some bills last week, and some will be tabled this week. This is the last week of Parliament. If the Liberals are planning to go to an election in August or September, then why introduce these bills at all? To me, it looks like they are just putting on a show, showing that they care about things, but not actually interested in fixing these things. The problem is the Liberals have done that for so long. People were initially hopeful, but are now starting to get cynical. They've seen this before. They've seen the Liberals say one thing and do another. And by tabling these type of bills right before the end of session, right before a potential election, really sends a message that they don't actually care about people. They don't actually care about getting these things fixed, and that hurts. So when we talk about childcare, for example, if the Liberals are serious about getting it done, we have said we are here to make that happen. In fact, we call the bluff and say, let's get it done now. Let's start passing legislation. Let's work if they want to through the summer. Let's make things happen. Let's get this done. This is vitally important to the recovery, to people right now. One of the most urgent things we can do is make sure people have access to childcare because women were so disproportionately impacted. So my point is here, the Liberals want to do these things. If it's not just for show, then we're going to see. If they call an election, it turns out this is all just for show. We want to get help to people. The Liberals just want to talk about it, make a show of it, but don't actually want to do it. And that's wrong. Donc, je veux commencer en disant, en reconnaissant qu'aujourd'hui, c'est la journée nationale des peuples autochtones. C'est important de célébrer la tradition, la culture et de la communauté autochtone. C'est important de les célébrer, mais aussi de s'engager à lutter pour la justice pour les peuples autochtones. Aussi, je vais aujourd'hui parler de le fait que le gouvernement libéral, dans une semaine, va couper l'aide aux gens qui en ont besoin. Les gens, presque 2 millions Canadiennes, qui ont besoin de la PCRE, vont voir une coupure de $800 à cause du gouvernement libéral. Et je dis que c'est une mauvaise décision. J'exige le gouvernement de ne pas couper l'aide aux gens pendant qu'on est toujours dans une pandémie et qu'on doit continuer cette aide dès qu'on a fini cette pandémie. Le gouvernement libéral, Justin Trudeau, a dit qu'ils vont être là pour les gens, mais couper leur aide, ce n'est pas être là pour les gens. Aussi, on a vu que le gouvernement libéral et Justin Trudeau a présenté quelques projets de loi à la fin de cette session. Ce que ça montre, c'est que le gouvernement libéral veut montrer ou veut faire des gestes symboliques au lieu de faire le travail actuellement, parce que si le gouvernement libéral déclenche une élection dans quelques mois, ça veut dire que tous ces projets de loi qui étaient présentés, c'était seulement un geste symbolique, pas des actions concrètes pour les gens, pas vraiment une volonté d'aider les gens, c'est seulement pour faire le show. Et c'est complètement inacceptable de faire ça. Les gens ont besoin d'aide, pas une geste symbolique. Donc encore, on exige du gouvernement de ne pas couper l'aide aux gens, de ne pas déclencher une élection et de faire le travail. On est là pour faire passer les projets de loi qui aident les gens, comme on a fait pendant la pandémie et comme on est prêt de faire dans l'avenir. Avec ça, merci, je suis prêt pour vos questions. I'm ready for your questions now.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Alors, j'aimerais inviter les membres des médias. Veuillez, s'il vous plaît, utiliser la fonction lever la main au bas de la page pour que vous puissiez poser votre question et question de suivi. I would like to invite members of the media to please use the raise hand function at the bottom of the page to ask your question and follow up. We will go ahead and start with Teresa Wright with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you so much for taking my questions. I'd like to start by asking, this is National Indigenous Peoples Day, as you recognize. What are some of the things you're reflecting on today, given everything that's happened in recent weeks with the discovery in Kamloops and concerns about the National Action Plan on murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls? Just wondering, you know, how are those things sort of framing the way you're looking at this day?
Well, we're looking at this day as an important day to celebrate Indigenous peoples, the culture, the language, the traditions, and it's important to celebrate because for so long, Indigenous people and their culture and their language have not been celebrated. In fact, have been actively discouraged and have been suppressed. So it is so important for us to celebrate. But given what's happened, as you mentioned, over the past couple of weeks, today is also a day where we've got to really recommit that not only should we celebrate Indigenous people, we've got to fight for justice for the first people of this land. And so while we're celebrating Indigenous people today on this day, the Liberal government is still fighting Indigenous kids in court. And we put forward a motion that was passed in Parliament saying that this Liberal government should stop fighting these kids in court. And to me, it really speaks of incredible hypocrisy that on one hand, at the federal level, we would celebrate National Indigenous Peoples Day. And on that very same, on the other hand, we've got a Liberal government that's now fighting them, that continues to fight these kids in court, despite multiple human rights tribunal decisions, Canadian human rights tribunal decisions, that say that these kids were willfully and recklessly discriminated and deserve justice. Then the Liberal government's fighting against them. And that's wrong. And I'm really reflecting on how that feels so hypocritical today.
Teresa, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thank you. On Friday, the federal government was recognizing the passage of the UNDRIP legislation, at least passing in the Senate. It hasn't received royal consent, or it hasn't been proclaimed yet. But one of the things that President Obed from ITK said Friday was that the strength of this legislation will really hinge on its enforceability. So I'm wondering what mechanisms you'd like to see put in place to ensure that recourse and remedies are available that could perhaps avoid some of the court challenges that you were mentioning.
First off, I want to see it receive, as you mentioned, that proclamation, that royal assent. I believe it's scheduled for today, and I want to see that actually happen so that this bill is put into law. That is something that the Liberal government has the power to do. So again, I want to encourage the Liberal government to make that happen, so this bill becomes law. I also want that law to inform the way we conduct ourselves as a nation. And that was really one of the spirit of this law, is that it is a new way forward where we no longer have a federal government that does not work that works in a top-down approach, in a kind of enforcing decisions. It should be a partnership. It should be one of collaboration. It should be one where we recognize Indigenous communities' rights in their title. And that's really important. I also think about Romeo Saginash, our colleague in the New Democratic Party, who put forward this in the first place and was one of the champions behind it. And I think about Leah Gazan in our party, who's been a strong voice in pushing it forward. And we want to see that this is something that doesn't have to get to the point of enforceability. Of course, it should have strong enforceability, but it should really change the way government interacts with Indigenous people, so that the starting point of that relationship is a different path than has been walked in the past, one that is actually a path of partnership and respect and dignity and respect for the rights of the first people of this land, so that we are no longer in this confrontational scenario. We're working in collaboration. That's my hope. And then I want to see that the accountability measures are present so that we can actually see enforcement of this principle.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. So I would like to go back and see if we have any more questions. Avons-nous d'autres questions? Si vous avez une question, veuillez utiliser la fonction lever la main. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. Next, I have Dylan Robertson with the Winnipeg Free Press. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Thanks for taking our questions. Hi. I was just wondering about the CERB sort of wind down. You know, if you have any comment on what this means in Manitoba, just given that we do have higher case counts, my guess is that the reopening will be a little bit slower. We're still looking for clarity from the province, but could you just get into sort of the regional impact of the ramp down?
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. That is exactly why we should not, the Liberal government should not be cutting the help to people. So what's happening right now is that there are about 2 million Canadians that are on CRB. And CRB is the transformed version of CERB that people were on before CERB transferred to CRB. And there are a lot of people that need it. And to your point, a really great point is that we know that in different provinces, the impact of COVID-19 is different. The outbreaks are still very dangerous in Manitoba. We know the numbers have started to come down, but that had recently become another hotspot. We know that flare-ups like this might happen. And what will happen if the CRB is cut by $800 like Justin Trudeau is proposing to do, that is going to mean that families are not going to be able to afford their bills. They're not going to be able to put food on the table. They're not going to be able to afford rent. They're not going to be able to afford all the things that they need. And the reality is we are not through this pandemic. It is reckless and frankly heartless to cut the CRB, particularly given the example of Winnipeg, specifically Manitoba generally, and other communities, that we see that there are still outbreaks that are happening. There are still numbers increasing in some parts of the country. So we need to keep this in place, not just because there are people that are still unable to go back to work because their sectors are still shut down, but also there are potential other outbreaks that might happen. So for many reasons, the CRB should continue at the full amount until we are through this thing. And it should not be cut to $800 starting in 1 week, as the Liberals are proposing.
And just as a follow-up, my apologies if this is publicly stated already, but I was wondering what the NDP idea is for the ramp down, if you want this pegged to certain metrics or indicators, or if there's a certain date that you've put forward as how to, start to phase this out, and if it should be a phase out or just a solid, this is the end of the program at the full rate.
Right, so right now the program is slated to continue till September. At a minimum, the program should continue at the full amount until the end. We should also consider for certain sectors that sector-specific support is available. I've spoken to musicians and they are unable to go back to work. They simply can't go back to work. Their lifestyle in terms of going to events, festivals, big gigs, touring across the country, they can't do that. So for artists, and we want to support artists, they can't go back to work. People who work in the tourism sector cannot continue. People aren't able to come to Canada in the same way. And so all those jobs, all those people that are in the tourist sector are not able to get back to work. The service sectors are still greatly reduced. Even with reopenings, people aren't able to go back with the full numbers that people were before. So their jobs are simply, again, not there. So what we want to see is that there's a plan in place to get help to people for as long as they need until we are fully recovered and fully reopened. The Liberals are willing to cut off help to people in need right now, despite the fact that we know that we're still in this. What makes it even worse is the Liberals aren't doing anything about some of the wealthiest corporations in Canada that took public money and then turned around and paid out vast sums to their shareholders. They abuse the system. They should be the ones that are clawing. We should claw back money from them. There are companies that took the wage subsidy and increased their pay to executives. They increased their pay and bonuses. That should not have happened. And those companies should have to be clawed back. We've got companies that took wage subsidy and actually laid off workers. They should see their money clawed back. That's where the government should be searching for revenue, taxing the ultra rich, not going after workers that simply can't go back to work. That is a callous decision that the Liberals are making.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais savoir s'il y a d'autres questions. Veuillez, s'il vous plaît, utiliser la fonction lever la main pour poser votre question et suivi. Please use the raise hand function to ask your question and your follow-up. I see no more questions. Je ne vois plus de questions. Donc, ceci conclut notre conférence de presse. This concludes our press conference. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Merci. Bye.